Hi, Dave. He's going to take it. Everybody, I'd like you to meet David Perkins. He's been so gracious to come here. He lives down by Albuquerque. And in the next 90 minutes...
Santa Fe.
Oh, Santa Fe?
Santa Fe.
It's the capital, Santa Fe. Excuse me.
Yeah.
In the next 90 minutes, he's going to tell us everything that we've been questioning. Aren't you?
This is true.
Okay.
This is true. Thank you very much. I've decided to start photographing audiences. I don't know why. So I can make little files on all of you. Just kidding. Just take it easy. Take it easy. All right, I'm going to have to talk real loud. We got a lot of generators and alien buzzes going on. We have a problem, obviously, seeing these slides. So you're going to have to use your best active creative imagination to, as I describe them, to block in what's going on here. My name is David Perkins still. I'm a dual resident actually of Santa Fe and the Huerfano Valley, which is the next valley over to the east, near a town called Gardner. Excuse me. I've lived over there since I started building a house over there in 1969. I'm still working on it. It's a lifelong project. Another thing that's a lifelong project is my interest in UFOs, which brings us all here today, of course. But what I'd like to do in a brief 90 minutes is, what is this hiss sound we're getting? Is to lay out some of the highlights and the lowlights of my 30 years, almost 30 years now, research into this topic. It's been a long haul, and I see no end in sight. First of all, I'd like to thank Judy for having me. It was very gracious and generous to invite me to this. I really appreciate that. And also to my friend Carolyn Lawrence, who has made it possible for me to speak to groups like this. I tend to find myself in a weird no man's land because I have a peculiar viewpoint on UFOs, I guess. So I hope you won't run screaming and howling from the tent once I start into this. I would like to start off by saying I believe UFOs are real. That's as much as I'll give you. Beyond that, we're going to have to unravel for a while what real means, and you'll see that this is not so simple. In fact, it's incredibly complex, to my mind at least. If, like my friend says, if this was simple, everybody would have figured it out, right? As far as I know, no one has figured it out. Nobody has convinced me what the real answer is that explains all the evidence. And that's the theory that I have to be personally satisfied, to have my curiosity satisfied about this topic. It has to be a theory that covers all the evidence. So keeping that in mind, you're going to hopefully see exactly how complex this could really be, at least to my mind. Now maybe you have it, maybe it's much simpler in your mind, and I hope that if it is, and if you see errors here, that you can correct me. I would really like to know where I'm wrong. I guess there are three possibilities here, actually. One is that I'm totally correct. The second one is I'm partially correct. And the third one is I'm wrong. So if I'm wrong, you tell me. I thought it was sort of interesting. I spoke to Colorado MUFON group. Excuse me. I went on hammering on this topic for 2 hours. At the end of 2 hours, John Schuessler was there, and he came up afterwards, and I thought, oh boy, I don't know if he's going to like that or not. He didn't have a word to say about it one way or the other, just asked about old friends, which I thought was kind of curious. Now some people, the UFO people that I call them, the major UFO groups, tend to not like what I'm saying because they think I'm insufficiently positive about the reality of UFOs. The scientific groups don't like what I'm saying because they think UFOs are absurd nonsense. And I certainly don't believe that. I think UFOs are very important. The question is, what are they? And the question is, what is the true nature of the UFO experience? So bearing all of that in mind, what I would like to ask you to do is, for this brief 90 minutes, is to perhaps put aside your belief systems, your assumptions, your expectations, your needs, and previous ways of looking at this. And it's what I always ask audiences to do, is just briefly, let's turn this thing upside down on its head and look at it from a completely different angle. Now, as far as I know, I'm the only person that has this point of view, which doesn't give me a lot of confidence, if you know what I mean. But that doesn't necessarily mean it's wrong. It just means I can't seem to persuade anybody else that what I'm saying has validity. And I'll go into that in detail, why the circumstances are that that's the case. I think of some quotes like Arthur C. Clarke, for instance, saying, what was his quote? Something like, there are only two possibilities. We are alone in the universe, or we're not. So, and then he says, oh, each one is equally frightening. And in a way, I don't think either one is actually frightening. If we're alone, that's the way it goes. And if we're not alone, so much the merrier, you know. I just don't see how it's exactly frightening. And that's the general tone of my research, and that's one of the reasons I really applaud Judy and her approach to this topic, and the fact that she can get everybody here, serve such a valuable function in the community and the larger community, and her wonderful lighthearted humor and her fun-loving approach to all of this is really refreshing to me, and I think to you, all of you too, who know her. So keeping that in mind, let's keep a light heart and try to keep an open mind. And when I say think outside the box, I'm talking about really thinking outside the box. I mean, to most people, talking about UFOs is thinking outside the box. But I'm talking about thinking outside of that box. So I can tell I have an unusually intelligent audience here. I can just tell. I know these things. And I really always like to commend any group of people, it turns out, to listen to this kind of stuff, because it's difficult. And I myself am exposed to a fair amount of ridicule, and you know, my friends tell me, get a life and stuff like that. And they'd say, boy, you're a really good writer, but you should stick to stuff like biographies. And I said, no, this is it. This is the mother lode of all current scientific inquiry as far as I'm concerned. And the fact that scientists don't see it that way, I think, is really a great loss for all of us. So let's... yeah, when
this is on, the video gets messed up.
Okay. Well, you can see we're up against some serious technical problems here, but that's not going to stop us one bit. We're going to roll right ahead with this. Oh, it's just about hopeless here, but what that is a 16th century engraving of a man that's crawling through the veil of the world and looking at the machinery behind nature. And that's what I hope to do here, and is to really examine what is the machinery behind nature, behind this veil that we see here. If we poke our head through there, what are we going to find? All right, I got the button. And we're off. Yeah. Okay. That's a lovely shot of one of the Hubble shots of the great mysterious void. It's one of the galaxies that the Hubble shot. It's pretty hopeless. Now here, I just want to use this as a little example. This is my friend Nancy Talbot. She and I have a long-running and spirited discussion about whether these phenomena that we study, cattle mutilations, crop circles, UFOs, whether they're coming from without, another intelligence, extraterrestrial, God, whatever, coming from somewhere out there and happening to us, or whether indeed these energies, we somehow focus them in our own consciousness, maybe as a group or individually, either one, and somehow these events rise up from us and are manifest. She's a scientist, basically. She doesn't have scientific training, but she's really educated herself. And she is really on this precarious tightrope right now, trying to be scientific with the material that she gathers. And on the other hand, being a woman and being open and intuitive and an amazing person, she wonders if somehow aliens are connecting with her. She's some sort of conduit for an alien intelligence wishes, or she's supposed to be a messenger to the world or something. So she goes to Holland and connects with this young man who I think is a classic example of a sensitive, the kind of young man that poltergeist happen around. All kinds of manifestations are always happening. Cell phones are burning up in his hand. He can predict crop circles. It seems to me a very obvious case of events focusing around a human being, an individual person. And she's gotten sort of sucked into this scenario with him. Is it getting darker, or am I losing my vision? What's happening? Thank you.
Is that coming from a lens?
I thought it was. Thought I was passing out or something. I don't know.
If that screen was closer, would it be brighter?
Would it be smaller? Yeah, I'm not sure. We might try a little experiment here in a minute. All right. So Nancy goes to Holland. This young man, Robert, she's bemoaning the fact that nothing ever happens to her, and that she wants a sign of some sort, and she's all depressed. Goes to bed at 3:30 in the morning, sitting there on her bed, looks out the window, boom, the big light comes down from the sky, and forms a crop circle right in front of her eyes. Let's see if this thing's going to go. This big blue light, a big swirling vortex right there is happening. It comes down, it creates a crop circle right here. This is one of the few eyewitness to crop circles that we've ever had, especially by a trained researcher and observer. So of course she was rather flabbergasted by the whole thing. And said, "Help, this is it. They're communicating with me." And I said, "Well, haven't you considered the possibility that your wishes and your needs and your expectations were so strong, and in conjunction with Robert and his field of energy, or whatever's going on around him, that this thing manifests through that format?" And she doesn't like that idea. She prefers to think of like she's been chosen to see this. So here's a big problem in my mind, right? A big, big problem. And this is where I'm seriously hung up, and I don't know anybody that can really resolve this, that has resolved it. So as you can see, that's where the real crux of this is. Is this something we're generating, perhaps in conjunction with other people or the human collective unconscious, or perhaps the consciousness of the earth, the Gaia consciousness I call it? Or is this something totally from without, totally other, that's coming down and interacting with us? And I think you know what I feel about it, but I'm not sure. All right, here's their circle. You can just barely see it. We get some more cloud cover. Just a simple circle, boom, right in front of her. Here's her colleague, well, he's not a doctor, okay, William Levengood, who has done much of the best research scientifically on crop circles, cattle mutilations, and UFO trace cases. And he keeps coming up with some very interesting results, and I'll go into that a bit more. Oh, I don't even know what that is. That's a dark night in Holland? I don't know. Okay, here are some of those fabulous circles, as you just to refresh your memory. Those big, beautiful formations from England. Right off the bat, see, we have these discrepancies which I wish we could resolve. For instance, Nancy, I can't remember what her number is. I think it's somewhere around over 300 of the circles that they have sampled, of which she says somewhere around 90% are showing what she calls signs of being a true circle, not something formed by hoaxers. And the way they figure that is changes in the soil, changes in the plants, certain things that Levengood has come up with to test to see if this is a natural or man-made phenomenon. Primarily They microscopically look at the plants, and if the plants show evidence of a transient high heat, what he considers something in the microwave realm, something hot enough to heat up the water in those plants, blow through the stems, and create what they call cell wall pitting, or node expansion and expulsion cavities. That's something obviously you don't get by tromping on a plant. You don't create 300-degree heat by tromping on it. So by looking at these plants and then looking at the mitochondria in the plants to figure out their respiration rates, and by looking at the soil, see evidence of high heat, they've determined that somewhere around 90% of what they've tested, of these 300 and some tests, have been authentic circles, not man-made. Now somebody like Colin Andrews says about the exact opposite. He thinks 80% of all circles he's examined are hoaxes. So somebody's wrong. I don't know who's wrong. What I find weird is that the people with scientific ability and capabilities to analyze these things don't go out there and do these tests for themselves. What's so hard about that? I mean, if you're at all schooled in this kind of stuff. And I've talked to biophysicists, and I said, why don't you look at these plants? And they just go crazy, because studying crop circles for a biophysicist is the kiss of death. Anybody that's got a scientific degree, a PhD, and works for the establishment or a corporation or whatever, any contact with UFOs, crop circles, cattle mutilations is the kiss of death for your career. So that makes it a little difficult, right, to get at. Here are those expulsion cavities I was talking about. See those big old blown, maybe you can see them. See that growth node right there is blown out. That being caused by what they think is something in a microwave type realm of heat in 300 degrees plus that would heat up that water to steam. There's another beautiful formation from England. Top shows more of those blown out nodes. Here you might be able to see what they call cell wall pitting. These little holes right here in the cells. Stop blinking. All right, right there. I know in the back it's hopeless, but take my word, there are really little holes in there. So anyway, this is what they consider signs of an authentic circle. Also, another finding that Levengood came up with, which is really astounding, is this, the presence of these small magnetic particles at crop circle sites. And here's a pillar of some of them. I know I'm blocking your way over here, but you're just going to have to lean around. See this little stack of these magnetic particles here? They're obviously magnetic and stick to each other. Now he's found those at several crop circle sites in extremely high densities, including one that was tested nearby here at a cattle mutilation site. Now here's where I start wondering, where I'm starting to weave all these what I call paranormal phenomena together, because I don't think you can separate them. I used to think you could, but as I go further and further in this business, I don't think you can separate any of this stuff. I think it's all interrelated. And I fight tooth and nail with certain people in the UFO community who say abductions are not a paranormal phenomenon. And I said, yes, they are. I think they are. And I used to not be sure, but now I'm pretty sure they are what I would call a paranormal phenomenon, just as crop circles are and cattle mutilations are. So what I'm looking for is what, if you accept that premise, what could possibly link these things. And this is where Levengood and Nancy Talbot and people like this are coming up with astounding information, because if they're finding the same kind of stuff at cattle mutilation sites with these small magnetic particles right around the excision sites, and the same changes in the plant chemistry and the same changes to the soil in crop circles and cattle mutilations and UFO landing traces, probably 7 cases of those. So right off the bat, we've got scientific evidence that's linking these phenomena. So let's see what that means. Oh, that's a close-up of these little magnetic particles. They're found in, like, the one Chris O'Brien sampled near here, I believe it was like 1,000 times what normal background would be. You can't see much here. Too bad, these graphs are interesting, but have to wing it a little bit without the slide. What's curious about these things is they are found naturally. If we went out and did any soil right outside the tent here, we would find these little particles. And apparently they come from both the Earth, and if they show evidence of this high heat, they're kind of rounded like they've been in some sort of heat. So Levengood came up with this theory, which another guy, Terence Meaden in England, also had, about ion plasma vortices that would come down. There was a rare atmospheric phenomenon that would come sweeping down out of the skies, pick up meteoric material and its way down in this vortex, and end up descending to the ground and depositing them in the crop circle or near the cattle mutilation. Now that's okay for a crop circle, and I've seen evidence that in nature fractals and stuff do create incredibly beautiful and weird patterns similar to crop circles. But they don't generally core out the sex organs of animals, in my experience. These rare weather phenomena don't seem to have that sort of interest and purpose. So it's a bit of a stretch, but Levengood says, hey, I can't come up with anything better. It's a rare atmospheric phenomenon. It comes down, sweeps, swirling, distributes these things. What this is showing is that actually at the edge of these circles, they grow from the center of the circle. The distribution is thicker, thicker, thicker until it gets even a little bit outside the circle, and then it drops off rapidly and disappears. So whatever it's distributing them is like distributing them past the edge of the circle. I think that's an interesting point. Same way for cattle mutilations. If you do the ring test around these mutilations, they get more and more and more out past a certain point, and then they just drop off rapidly. So apparently some giant swirling thing was happening right there. Whether you call it ion plasma vortex, I don't know. Now, of course, science doesn't even recognize the fact that there is such a thing as an ion plasma vortex. And here's another little curiosity in the cattle mutilations. I should have mentioned earlier that I've been actually working on the cattle mutilations. That's been my main topic of interest since 1975. That's when I first got started in this over in the Huerfano Valley. They were happening around my house. It was hard to ignore them when there's one on the road leading to your house about a mile away. And that particular one had 3 drops of blood leading toward my house, right? So the sheriff comes up and says, well, looks like you're a suspect. There are 3 drops of blood going in your direction. Oh, yeah, I did it. Okay, right. So I always thought it was extremely humorous that I was actually a suspect. 10,000 mutilations later, I guess I'm still a suspect. This particular case is another one that Levengood looked into, just to show you, when people say there's no scientific evidence that mutilations are real, other than, the common theory is that they're predator damage, and that fools like me go around and look at them and can't tell the difference between predator damage and something truly unique. But I guess that makes fools of a lot of Western ranchers who've been, ranching for generations, who know a genuinely weirdly killed cow from a predator damage, unless they're just swept up in some sort of mass delusion, which several people have written articles to that effect. That all of a sudden all the ranchers in the community just go crazy and start reporting stuff that's not there, which I guess it's possible, but not the ranchers I know. In this particular case, what was so unusual about it was that the hemoglobin, they found little bits of matter on the hide of this cow, and they analyzed it and found that these were pure hemoglobin. Somehow, there are 3 different ways to get pure hemoglobin. All of them involve extensive lab equipment, which would be unwieldy, unless maybe an advanced civilization could do it on the spot, but nobody that we know could do this easily and on the spot. It's a rather lengthy technique to get pure hemoglobin. Now, just when you think that you're onto something in this game, you get the rug pulled out from under you. And that's part of the beauty of it. That's why nobody's figured it out. As soon as you get on a run, I've worked on so many theories with this stuff. And every one, you know, you get 3 points in a row, and you think you have a trajectory or a vector of some sort. You say, aha, I'm onto something. It's nuclear testing. And then as soon as you do that, boom, something else comes along, which totally contradicts the last thing you were doing. So I think that is part of what's built into all of these phenomena is the so-called giggle factor, or the absurdity factor, or the weirdness factor, or whatever you want to call it. It's why everybody has been so unsuccessful at dealing with this. Because I think unless you consider every single thing that happens in a cattle mutilation area, or a UFO flap area, or a Bigfoot area, or crop circle area, that you're being dishonest in studying these things. And I think virtually everybody is being dishonest. That they don't really, they only report the stuff out of it that they want for fear of ridicule, basically. So in other words, you go to a community and they've had a bunch of cattle mutilations, and then as you're walking out the door, they say, oh yeah, well, we actually saw Bigfoot in the backyard too. Now, most researchers would just go, okay, right. And don't write that down, don't mention the Bigfoot. And they go back and say, yes, they had 7 cattle mutilations. They were scientifically tested. And I think it's really dishonest not to say they had a Bigfoot in the backyard. Or a UFO landed and little aliens got out or something. I mean, each one of these cases, if you really go after it, you'll find all these paranormal elements. Here's some more clean incision-looking stuff. Just to give you a rough idea of this cattle mutilation, what they actually look like. I don't want to dwell on this too much. This particular image was used in the X-Files. They never did an X-File on the cattle mutilations for some reason. Out of how many episodes did they do of that show? I don't know, hundreds? And for some reason, they never touched this. I always wondered why. In one of the shows, they had this behind Boulder, and he was going, well, it reminds me of those strange cattle mutilations in the Southwest, and they went on to something else, right? And that was the only mention of it ever. It's pretty grotesque, but that's a fairly common pattern of this jaw, all the skin removed, let's see, this excision around the jaw, and the skin and everything else removed right down to the white bone. And nobody can quite figure out how you get a bleached bone on a fresh cow like that, how you get every scrap of, you know, material, biological, muscle, tissue, whatever, off of that thing. That's kind of tricky. Here's one I investigated over in the Huerfano County. This one was found with that stick on it. And this was at a time when I was researching what I call the hooded figures. This was back in about '77. I had about a dozen cases of hooded figures at cattle mutilation sites. Arizona, Colorado, Idaho, New Mexico. And who were these hooded figures running around out in the pastures in the middle of the night? So I went, Satanist cults, they must be behind this. And sure enough, this particular one, the sheriff called me to look at it, and I said, did you see anybody suspicious? Oh yeah, well, we saw these monks or hooded figures driving back and forth on the interstate. And I went, oh, okay. Later, those same hooded figures showed up at a store near my house, and they seemed very strange to everybody, and they said they were going fishing. So I don't know who these people were. Maybe a total coincidence, but it just seemed to, over and over, you get this synchron. Here we were, me investigating early cattle mutilations and being totally baffled. Like I say, when I started into it, I actually thought it was the government. I thought it was some kind of Woodward and Bernstein, and I was going to go out there and bust the government in this big biological warfare testing program, and this was going to be major. But I quickly found that it wasn't that simple. I briefly looked at the cult idea. That was all well and nice, so there were a dozen cases of people running around the pastures in hoods in the middle of the night. Okay, but what about the UFO sightings? Were they also coming from the UFOs? What about the helicopters? This is me and my deceased wife, Carrie, looking at a mutilated cow. that was near Los Alamos. This was like a mile downstream from Los Alamos. The cow this was at a time when I was putting a lot of information out into the press about the connection between mutilations and nuclear waste sites, right? So I was all hot on this theory. Okay, this represents an effort by someone to monitor the entire environment for extent of nuclear contamination, both from atomic testing, nuclear power plants, all ends of the processing cycle. So I was all hot on this theory, and then I got a call from this Indian reservation. Oh, we got a mutilated cow. This was after I'd been out there earlier that day. And they found it after I left. Again, making me a suspect, I guess. And here's the cow. They take me out to the Indian police, and it's got its nose bubbling in this water that's coming directly from Los Alamos. I'm going, oh, wow. And then my brakes went out when I was going down the mountain while a small plane buzzed me relentlessly. It made for a really exciting day. That's some of our early mutilation friends. You may recognize Linda Howe. People that have been into this. She was early on with us, running around this whole area here looking at mutilated cows. This fellow, Ken Rommel, then in New Mexico, came on the scene, ex-FBI agent. He was going to solve it. Basically, he snarfed a bunch of government money and said it was all predators and we were all idiots. And he, the worst thing he said about me was that I was a known intoxicant. And I was very flattered, actually. I thought, wow, I've just got such an effect on people, I guess. And then, no, he said the only reason I was into this was to be more popular at cocktail parties. And I said, if anything, I'm a lot less popular at cocktail parties. Once I bring up cattle mutilations, they just run. Here's Senator Harrison Schmitt, was the second to the last man on the moon. New Mexico senator. This shows how the paranormal and politics don't mix all the time so well. Now he comes back from the moon and gets the wild hair to have a mutilation conference, a national mutilation conference. Invites all these people, all kinds of people. The Indian chiefs. I was the keynote speaker for I have no idea why. And scientists and law enforcement officials from all over the country. And of course, the New Mexico press had a field day with this, and they just killed him in the editorial pages. They said, Schmitt has gone Looney Tunes, he's lost his mind, he thinks cattle mutilations are real. We got to get rid of this senator, he's insane. So they voted him out at the next election, almost certainly because of his interest in cattle mutilations and hosting this conference. It was political suicide. Now this is a little town I went to, Ellsbury, Missouri, where I could, this is where I started really turning my mind around about all of this stuff. Because once I got past the predator theory, the Satanist cult theory, and the government testing theory, then I was confronted with person after person saying, well, my cow was mutilated, and I saw a UFO hovering over the field that night. And I went, oh dear. And so it was inescapable, just more and more reports like that. And so I was saying, well, if it walks like a duck and quacks like a duck, it's got to be a duck. But that's not necessarily true. It could be something else. But right here is where my mind really started getting changed in the late 70s. I went to this community. They had mutilations galore. They were proud of their mutilations. You know, they had these T-shirts made up that said, "Welcome to Ellsbury, Missouri, mutilated cow country." And they just with a little alien hanging out of a UFO with a cow leg, dripping blood, right? They said, "You want one of our T-shirts?" I went, "Yeah, I guess." It's really nice. Anyway, knowing that the cows were landing and mutilating, the aliens supposedly were mutilating cows every night and running around with bloody legs dripping off the UFO, they still went out in the field to wait for them and said, "I'm going to go right up there and get on that ship if they land out there." You know, they're all drinking beer, sitting out there every night, and I got into it. It was really fun. I'd sit there and drink beer with them all night and watch for this to happen. Never did see anything. But when I started poking around that community, what I found out was that there were a lot of other things happening. This is what I was talking about, the Bigfoot. These people were, this wasn't making the papers. All the papers would say is like, town's leading citizens see UFO, cows dropping like flies mutilated. But when we started talking to people, they said, well, we saw Bigfoot several times, and then we saw these little silver-suited people like 4 feet tall down by the dump. I mean, who is that? Silver-suited, 4 feet tall people at the dump? Oh yeah, that's typical, okay. Then they saw these other critters that are, what I call cryptozoological entities, which don't exist. Like Momo and these things they have in those parts. Things that look like half kangaroo, half chimpanzee, half armadillo, it's like, there's no such thing. But they saw them. They saw them. And then they'd say, well, we were out fishing on the Mississippi River, and we see these 3 55-gallon drums come floating down the river, and they just take off and fly off into the sky in formation. Okay. Write it down, and then we saw these black helicopters come, and we were looking at them through binoculars, and it turns out they didn't have any rotors. And then we were looking closer, and they morphed into a flying saucer. So, all right. But, the press doesn't cover that part, because that's where it hits the giggle factor quotient, and they just say, we can't deal with that. We can barely deal with a flying saucer and a cattle mutilation, but we can't deal with that other stuff. So let's not mention it. And that's why we're in such a problem in understanding this, because nobody ever mentions it. This is something that was flying around one night of a mutilation. It was taken by a young guy in a hay wagon. I wish you could see it better. It does have a bit of a circular aspect. You can see this kind of, I don't know, you probably can't see anything from back there. Anyway, it kind of looks like a bullseye. And it was silent, cruising back and forth at telephone pole level at the night of mutilation. We were so smart, we figured out where the next mutilation was going to be. They were happening around a microwave tower. We went out there and sat. Our last night, we said, we're going to see him tonight. So we said, somebody's going to stay awake all night, okay? And we're going to watch that microwave tower. So there were 3 of us. We sat there, and we took turns sleeping, watching the tower, watching the tower. Next morning, daybreak, okay, let's go back. Oh, what's that? Oh, it's a mutilated cow. I'll be darned. Right in front of our eyes, watching the thing all night long, right? So I'm going, no. And this is something that's happened to me many, many times. I've been that close. I've had, that kind of premonition, which leads me to, back to the original Nancy Talbot conundrum, which is, are we causing this? Are we triggering this? Are we contributing to this in any way with our consciousness? Or is this just happening to us? And for reasons unknown. Just to mess with our minds? I don't know why. Or so I'll go around giving lectures and telling these stories. I don't know. But I'm saying we have to be very critical in making that distinction, whether we're somehow part of the generation process or whether it's just stuff that happens to us. Oh dear. Here's where the headlines start going. UFOs linked to weird animal mutilations. This big thing, this was called Big Mama up here. Where's my light? That was seen up in the skies in northern Colorado, Logan County. It would discharge these little lights and they'd fly off in different directions and they'd come back to the so-called mothership and take off. And they'd chase them in airplanes. Of course, they could never catch them. Here's one from Linda's files showing sort of this array of different things happening, right, in a cattle mutilation case. Over here, this guy you can't tell, but he's like a green lizard man, sort of standing by this haystack type UFO. Here's like a haystack guy, also a Bigfoot type entity. And here's 2 little aliens that levitate this cow back into the UFO just with their hands. So we start getting different kind of creatures involved, different kind of scenarios. And I don't know where to put that, the Bigfoot connection, but I do know that it's shown up several times and quite well documented and is rarely mentioned because people, if you're into mutilations, you're having a hard enough time selling that premise to anybody, even in the UFO community, without saying, oh yeah, Bigfoot's part of it too. They go like, oh right, okay, forget the whole thing. And it's very hard. Over the years, it's really been difficult to sell even the idea of mutilations to the UFO community. They fought this tooth and nail. I say they, certain elements of ufology, didn't want the muddies watered by this bloody, ugly mess of the cattle mutilations. And I said, well, I'm sorry, but that's the way it is. You know, how can you separate them when you've got a report, many, many reports? Police, individuals, every type of good stuff that would stand up in courts of law, linking mutilations to UFOs, but they didn't want to hear any of it. They just thought it muddied the waters and made it more difficult for them to pursue so-called scientific ufology, which I think is an oxymoron. This is this group NIDS. I don't have time to go into this, I don't think, but I was just trying to show some of the scientific reporting that has been done on this topic. This particular one, they found potassium chloride in the animal, which is what's traditionally used to kill animals that have mad cow disease in England. The cow's heart was shredded. They don't know how. It was missing its fetus. So when people say there have been no scientific studies done on this, they're wrong. There have been hundreds of studies. I think of this, the way the press treats this is so bogus. Just think of this one incident. Actually, it was in Alamosa where I did the interview. What was the show? The Fox Family Channel had sort of a paranormal show. I can't block the name of it for the moment. Sort of like In Search Of or something like that, but it wasn't that. This is about 3 or 4 years ago. And they called me up and said, we're doing a show on the cattle mutilations. Would you like to be interviewed? I went, oh, whatever, sure. So I go over there and have my briefcase, and I'm totally dressed up, you know, coat and tie, the whole thing, to avoid the kook factor thing that I knew they were going to try to pull. So then I sit down and with all my briefcase, all these scientific reports like this one, and I go over this for 2 hours on tape with them, right? They said, well, what's your evidence? I said, okay, here's this, here's this, here's this. It was tested by this vet, tested by this lab, signed off by this cop, Colorado Bureau of Investigation, on and on and on, like this. Stack of papers in very infinite detail. And I said, whatever you do in this piece, please don't make me look like a true believer. You know, I'm not a believer in anything. All I believe is that I don't know what's going on. I have a tremendous sense of curiosity about this. I'd really like to know what's behind this. So just don't paint me into the believer corner, okay? And they went, oh, no problem. No, we're doing a straight study. So the thing comes on TV. First thing it says, here's David Perkins, a true believer in cattle mutilations. And then they said, then the next thing was like, Perkins maintains his outrageous belief in cattle mutilations, even though he has not one shred of scientific evidence to back his bizarre claims. You know, that's just like so low. And, you know, what can you do when you're up against that? I really thought I had some sort of chance of, you know, getting, I like to get this information out to the public. You can do with it what you want, or nothing, whatever. At least you should know what other people are coming up with. So I thought maybe I'd sneak something past them, you know, but no. So the only thing they could think of to do with me, since I was so neatly dressed and everything, I had on a turquoise ring, right? And so toward the end of my interview, I'm talking like this, and the camera starts zooming in on my ring. It gets up a real close-up of this turquoise. Goes, doo, 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 doo. He's crazy. He must be crazy because he's wearing a turquoise ring. He's got to be a crazy man. So it just makes it really difficult. That's all I know. And my point is there are hundreds of scientific reports. If anybody cares to go over them, you know. This is another report from NIDS. I'm just trying to beat them up a little bit. They're talking about all these reports that they took from Montana in 1975. It was a huge cattle mutilation wave, UFOs, helicopters, buzzing the nuclear facilities that year. Of course, none of the government reports mention the mutilations, and I thought it was a little curious because I went to the FOIA reports and they gave me tons of stuff. Said, oh yeah, cattle, they said UFOs were over the missile silos, mysterious helicopters were over the missile silos, no mention of mutilations whatsoever, even though there were hundreds of them, right, in the same vicinity at the same time. That seemed a little odd. So anyway, NIDS, this National Institute of Discovery Science, one of the few groups that actually does testing and studies of this kind of stuff, went up there and did a survey and report from the sheriff's files. They came up with whatever the heck it was. It was, I think it maybe has, I can't read the numbers here. It was A total of 257 events, 67 mutilations, 127 UFOs, and whatever it is. How many helicopters? 63 helicopters. And what that previous page said, they list all of this stuff, and then at the bottom there's a footnote that says, oh, and 60 other anomalies. So, okay, what were those other anomalies? Bigfoot running around carrying large flapping black plastic bags, people shooting Bigfoot, and the Bigfoot just going, oh, ow. And, and the UFO descriptions were, giant craft that would land with appendages like a giant egg with arms. Several people saw this out in the field, this giant paddling, breast-stroking egg. So the UFO reports were really outrageous. They didn't mention any of that. And they didn't mention the cult sites and all this other anomalous stuff that was going on. Lots of Bigfoot activity, though. So I think here's another example, this time from a group that actually studying paranormal phenomena. So we don't want to look like idiots. I mean, okay, we got a link between mutilations, helicopters, and UFOs. That's all we're going to talk about. So I think they were being extremely dishonest intellectually in not including this other material. Their theory is like, we'll never gain scientific respectability if we start throwing that kind of stuff in. Well, maybe you never will gain scientific respectability. Let's face it, let's be realistic here. This is not designed for scientific respectability. Here's this is just a stock photo of these so-called black helicopters that were plaguing this situation, including this valley, all during the 70s around cattle mutilation sites. Nobody ever traced where they came from. One never crashed. They morphed into other objects. They didn't have rotors a lot of the time. They were totally silent. They didn't really seem like helicopters when you get right down to it. What were they? Could they have been another form of UFO or another form of apparition, vision? I don't know. But they were there. And I noticed today in common news parlance, when they want to make somebody sound like a nut, they say, oh, he's a member of the black helicopter crowd. And so if you're listening to the news shows and they say somebody's in the part of the black helicopter crowd, that means you believe in world conspiracies and you believe in nutty ideas like New World Orders and stuff like that. So that's sort of a clever way of painting you into a stereotype if you're labeled as part of the black helicopter crowd, which I guess I am, because I honestly think there were hundreds of these things running around. If you go back in the newspapers from that period, you'll certainly find it. And they were never traced anywhere. All right, so we've sort of set it up here. We have a little bit to go. I was trying to establish basically the parameters of what I'm dealing with, the kinds of phenomena. Now let's try to make some sense of it, at least the way I see it. Here we have Carl Jung, and this is where I started. I read Carl Jung, the famous Swiss psychologist, when I was about 13 years old, I think. His last book was Flying Saucers, A Modern Myth of Things Seen in the Sky. Now, Jung came up with the idea that, oddly enough, he left the flying saucer topic to the last thing in his life, 1959. Excuse me. Even he couldn't deal with it until he knew he was going to die. He said, I don't have anything to lose, who cares? I'm going to tackle this one. It's the most interesting thing going. So he started interviewing people and came up with this idea that flying saucers were some sort of projection from humanity's collective unconscious mind. That was a desire for unity. They were circular. They were some sort of like a mandala, a vision of unity for humanity in times of terrific strife. This was right after World War II, basically. We still had the images of the bomb in our mind. It was a very fraught time, psychically fraught, I guess you'd say. With the nuclear genie out of the bottle, I think the whole world was pretty scared and paranoid. And he was basically saying that these are images that we're projecting our contents of our unconscious out into reality, and there's some sort of images of universal oneness or something to heal our souls, basically. He made some very odd logical conclusions to me. I reread that recently. He was saying something like, we all know that psychics and people of unusual abilities can project psychisms, but they're only a few feet from the individual involved. It's preposterous to think that this could, apply to something way up in the sky. And why is it preposterous? I mean, that doesn't make any sense to me. If you accept the fact that someone with psychic powers can manifest something 2 feet away, what's the difference if it's 2,000 feet away? If you accept it, that's possible. So to me, that seemed like a giant. He said to accept that premise is to go down an endless black hole or something like that. And so I think basically at that point he copped out on that materialization aspect. He tampered with the idea that somehow the mind could materialize things, but he couldn't go there. It was too much. So in psychological, in parapsychological terminology these days, they call that a macro PK event, a macro psychokinetic event. It's a large scale, something that happens big in the material world with a material thing. So that's what they describe, what Jung would have used that terminology if he was talking about that kind of thing today. Oh, that was Freud. I wanted to mention him because he was also the twin giant of psychology. And he came up with the idea of the unconscious and the conscious mind. He came up with the idea of the id, basically. These guys were the first to really explore what the idea of the unconscious mind was. And I think they deserve a lot of credit for that. We'll go more into the unconscious, but both of those ideas, keep in mind here. Oh, golly. That's just the painting I wanted to show because it was interesting, but saucers coming from the ocean, the ocean in my mind in that painting represents the unconscious, and these saucers are emanating from it and coming up on humanity and appealing to our hopes and fears. I don't even know what that is. Okay. Oh, I'm so sorry. This couldn't be better for you. But this is an image from the Forbidden Planet, a 1956 movie. This is one of the first times in science fiction ever actually took the idea of Freud that these creatures from the id would come up. This is the creature from the id in that movie. You can't really say. It looks like a crab that's on fire or something. I don't know what it is. But anyway, it came from the so-called evil doctor's his unconscious mind, from his id, and it was running around killing the handsome young stud earthlings that were there to take his daughter away. So he was unconsciously trying to destroy these young guys who were going to take his beautiful daughter away. And this creature was created by his mind, went around killing the white guys, the white earth guys. The first time Hollywood's ever touched this theme, but interesting, very interesting. And we have other examples now. This is such a beautiful painting. This is an incubus. Back in the Middle Ages, they had this concept of incubus and succubus, which has an interesting parallel to our modern day abductions. An incubus would come to a woman and have sexual relationships with her, or some sort of intimate relationship in the night when she was asleep. And succubus would do the same with a man. And it was hard to figure out what they were doing. They were, I'm not sure if they were evil or satanic, or if they were in the fairy realm, but it was based on them wanting the genetics of these people to work with for their kind, which is really similar to the same myth we hear 400 years later today. Gee, what do we got? There's your succubus. It's just as well you can't see that one. It's rather explicit. And there are young people. No, there aren't. Okay. Good grief. There's nothing there. Oh, my. Maybe you saw something there. I didn't. Okay, here's another concept pioneered by Jung, synchronicity, which is what he called an acausal connecting principle. Key word here being acausal. What I'm trying to show is that things can happen in the material world that have no apparent cause. And this is what he called bridge between mind and matter. Now, scientists can't explain what this is, and I'll talk about it in the quantum realm too, that there's some sort of interconnecting principle, what they call non-energetic. In other words, they can't block it. They'll put up lead barriers, and they'll try to block every single way that whatever possible energetic form, beam, electromagnetic, whatever, is blocked, and it still gets through. This synchronicity being the psychological equivalent of quantum physics, what they call non-locality, that there's some sort of signaling between particles, which implies intelligence, and they can't figure out what this form is. It's faster than light, but it affects physical matter. So I'm very interested in this idea of whatever this interconnecting energy is amongst all of us right at this moment, amongst us and the plants out there, between us and everything that exists in the universe. There seems to be no clear dividing line if you really, once the further you go into quantum physics to look at this. Here's another excellent book on the same topic. These are all things I really recommend. Another one, Synchronicity, Science, Myth, and the Trickster. Trickster is something I'm going to get into just a little bit. And that was my most recent article that I couldn't get published in the United States. I had to go to England to get it published, because ufology is such stick in the muds around here. They just can't countenance anything that just doesn't fit the exact mold of aliens are taking over the earth and creating a hybrid species. That's the way it is. Well, I don't know about that. What do we got? Here's the bomb going off, which I think is the biggest psychic rent that we've ever had as a species, and I think it could be responsible for endless permutations of belief systems and fears and things that get translated into phenomena, basically. This was a thing that Jung concentrated on, talking a lot about, that somehow, and ufologists have too, they say, isn't it weird that we set off these big bombs in 45 and whatnot, and then the age of flying saucers begins in 47. And that whatever these things were flying around seemed to have an unusual interest in our military facilities where the nuclear bombs were kept, in Oak Ridge, Tennessee, and the nuclear power plants as they came online. There's a long history of interconnectedness between the UFO phenomena and nuclear, human nuclear activities. I wish somebody would just compile all of that material. I think it would be really fascinating. I've never actually seen it in one place. But there you have the alien head coming out of the bomb. I don't know. It's a Wes Crum drawing. I just liked it. Oh, dear. This is what this was to represent. Was Jung is basically saying that dreams, that dreams are a gift. That what are the contents of our unconscious mind, as we can recall it the next day, that's a gift. And a lot of indigenous cultures have what they call big dreams. If somebody will get up in the morning and say, oh, I had a big dream last night, that's when everybody sits down and says, okay. You know, if you had a dream, it's like, okay, I caught a rabbit and, you know, it took me forever. People say, oh, well, don't want to hear it. But if you have a big dream, that's a big, significant dream. That's a big gift, something that really you can change your life, that you can analyze. It's giving you tremendous insight from your unconscious mind. He used that as a psychological tool, as did Freud and everybody since then. What he didn't go into too much was that a lot of the great discoveries in science have been made through that technique. This particular one, the benzene ring, this guy Kukulke woke up one morning, he was trying to figure out what the structure of benzene was. He woke up, it's a snake eating its tail. And sure enough, he goes and draws it out, figures it all out, and it's his dream image led him to figure out what the nature of benzene was. And the same thing for DNA. Watson wakes up. I had a dream about a spiral staircase. He was stuck on the nature of what DNA was. And sure enough, it's a spiral. And a lot of other great geniuses have had these illuminations from the unconscious through dreams to make some of the biggest discoveries humanity's ever made. I mean, Tesla, you could say that alternating current, his discovery of that, he was somewhat conscious sitting on a bench and had this flash of light, and suddenly realized what the nature of alternating current was, which our whole society runs on now. And you can go on and on in the history of science where these things are thrust up through the unconscious. I'm making a point that UFOs are thrust up from the unconscious, and they're also a gift to us. They're a gift in what they can teach us about propulsion systems, what they can teach us about interplanetary travel, about new ways of treating the Earth, any number of things that you could interpret a UFO to be if you look at it as something thrust up from the collective unconscious of our species. So it's not a trivial thing to be casually discarded. What was that? We had Jacques Vallée. Here's some of the people I've run across, and you probably have heard of Jacques Vallée. He's somewhat controversial among what's so-called nuts and bolts ufologists because he early on, well not early on, somewhere along the line, he veered off the extraterrestrial hypothesis and said something screwy here. This doesn't account for all the evidence. The same thing, conclusion I came to. He started looking back into folklore and came up with started noticing all the similarity between all the fairy material from northern England, 500 years ago, 400 years ago, maybe more, back to Druid times, in which the so-called fairies seem to be doing the same thing that the so-called aliens are doing now. And he took a lot of heat from this in his book, Passport to Magonia. He was coming up. This is an image of a bunch of fairies spiriting off this little baby. And in fairy lore, these babies were called changelings. So they would come, fairies, the little people would come to your house at night, take away your healthy baby, and leave a sickly fairy baby in its place. And they wanted the genetic material from these healthy human babies to increase their genetic stock, which sounds identical to what the current myth is of what the so-called Greys are doing, or the aliens that are running around abducting people and taking genetic material. This hasn't changed in 500 years. So are we to say, okay, well, those people back in those days were so superstitious that it actually was little gray aliens, and they just didn't know what the deal was, and to them, they were fairies, so they're fairies. But I'm not sure. It seems to me like every age has a certain cultural expectation of what they want to see, or what they need to see, or what's going to be acceptable, or what's going to have motivating power to keep that myth alive, and it's going to appear as that to us. So we need a technologically based, high-tech mythology. They didn't need it that high-tech. Their equivalent of this, of what we're seeing now, ran around in the woods. We're like nature spirits. They didn't have any craft. They flew from galaxy to galaxy. So bear that in mind, that there's a long tradition of this. Here's another fellow, a friend of mine, John Keel, who wrote the Mothman Prophecies. If you read that book, that's a case study in every kind of weirdness in the world happening at the same time, the same place. He's got the cattle mutilations way back. That was in '66. That was before Snippy the horse over here. Every kind of weird thing in the world. He tends to see he calls them ultra-terrestrials, and tends to see them as some sort of inhabitants of the Earth that they live maybe in another dimension, another sphere, pop in and out of our sphere of existence, and are just a big pain in the butt, basically, to us at all times. They just menace us, plague us, harass us. They have nothing, good for us at all. So he has a pretty negative view on that. My point of view is that I think these things are all here as learning tools. I don't think they have. If you study the trickster material, the trickster in every culture is not an immoral force. The trickster is an amoral force. That's something that it's sent into. The trickster is sent in to rock the boat whenever one way of thought gets to be too dominant. Then you have some sort of trickster event or character that comes in and rocks the boat and lets the other side of the thinking take over for a while. So I think these so-called ultra-terrestrials and this, what I see as tricksterism at work in a lot of these cases, is that very, very, what I call biological mechanism at work in our species. that somehow when things get too out of whack, when science gets too predominant, then we have a huge UFO wave. And you have to say that the atomic bomb would be pretty good evidence that science has gotten out of whack, you know. And hey, it's like, wait a minute, if we get on this road, this is what we have to look forward to, total nuclear annihilation. So somehow in the big collective unconscious species mind of ours, we say, we better do something to counteract this. So then we have a massive UFO wave soon thereafter, in which people say, well, maybe people are coming from outer space to do something about this, or I don't know. And everything that goes with UFO beliefs, which tends to be a certain more of openness to creativity, to the intuition, to non-logical ways of seeing things. I wouldn't say it's anti-scientific, but I would say it's on the other side of the coin. So somehow maybe all these things are biological mechanisms that appear and manifest for teaching purposes, or to basically keep it what I call homeostasis in our biological species, to keep us sound and survivable. Now, I don't know anybody who's ever proposed that theory. And every time I say it, people just usually go nuts and say I'm wrong, but I don't think I'm wrong. I think that is really what's at work here. And what's the oddest part of this is if that's true, that in effect, I'm negating that process. So this is like the big irony of my own personal research. If somehow I'm identifying a biological mechanism that's at work to keep us in some sort of what I call the homeostasis balanced state as humanity, if I expose that mechanism, I defeat it. So if you defeat it, then you're actually not helping your species. So you're actually hurting your species. So don't believe a word I said. Oh dear. Good one. Oh, here's our tulpas. I talked about these up in, these are some examples of other ways of looking at things. I wish you could see this. This guy on the left is really a piece of work. This was taken back in like 1912. The Tibetans have a curious custom of what they call tulpas. Supposedly very ascended, highly spiritual people can create with their minds anything, really. They can create a landscape. They can commonly create human beings. They create little monks that carry their stuff around. This lady, Alexandra David Neal, went over there to study this. Whoop, where'd it go? Oh, I don't think that was a visible one. Anyway, she went over there and lived in a cave at 13,000 feet and studied everything they knew, and she created her own tulpa with her mind. She created this little fat jolly monk to carry her stuff around. And she said, this is great, you know, you can create with your mind somebody and help you out and carry your stuff around. And then she said after 6 months, the monk grew tiresome and troublesome. And then it took another 6 months to get rid of it with her mind, right? She didn't know how to get rid of it once it was created. But the point was that these people supposedly could consciously, that guy back in that other photo supposedly could kill you at a distance with his thoughts, or hypnotize you with his thoughts. What was her name? Alexandra David Neal. She wrote 4 books on her journeys to Tibet. Really interesting. So this idea, my friends in the research community are always on to me about tulpas. You know, since I mentioned this early on, they're always making fun of me. It's like, what do you think, it's tulpas or UFOs or tulpas? Oh, okay, whatever. I said, they might be, I don't know. They might be created by our minds, my mind, your mind, the collective conscious, unconscious minds, the mind of the planet itself. I don't know, it's possible. It seems like there is evidence in the human experience with this kind of stuff where stuff can be consciously created, and other people claim that it happens. I don't know, I'm not sure about it myself, but where I go with this is like, okay, so these people could consciously create a little monk to carry their stuff around. They could consciously create materialized things, psychics, you know, psychisms. In those days it was ectoplasm, whatever. We don't have ectoplasm anymore, that's out of vogue, right? In In those days, everything was, if you were a true psychic, you would materialize some sort of ectoplasm, gook. I was never quite sure what the point of that was, you know. It would come out of all your orifices. It's like, okay, but nobody ever reports that anymore. What I'm curious about is back to the Jungian stuff, is like what's possible in the unconscious mind? So, okay, maybe these people are trained to consciously create an ashtray on that table if they want. But I don't know, what I'm wondering is like what happens in the unconscious mind, and maybe while we're all asleep. Is there some sort of dream linkage that goes on? Is there some sort of, I mean, there are books called Dream Telepathy. There's several books on that. Do we really know where we go? I mean, here's an example right here of astral projection, which is another very interesting concept. This happening from a sleeping unconscious state. Apparently people can do it from the conscious state. This is the same concept from China 400 years ago. Something coming out of this guy's mind, brain. And who knows what these things are and what they can do. Can they mutilate cows? Can they present themselves as UFOs? Can they make crop circles? Is there some sort of coalescence that happens in a dreaming, sleeping state amongst members of our species? We know that there's some sort of what they call morphic resonance. That's the way that species communicate with each other. This is another one of those non-energetic, a-causal things I was talking about. They can't find a cause for it. They don't know what the energy source is. But somehow, you know, if a bird learns to open a milk carton on this table, a bird 100 miles away will instantly know how to do the same thing. They did all these studies in England. So there was something that happened that was faster than the speed of light, apparently. There was a connection to other members of that species, is what they call morphic resonance. So are we involved in some sort of morphic resonance with it in creation of UFOs or co-creation of UFOs? I don't know. I think it's possible. I'm asking you to bear with me. At least we're turning this thing on its head for a while. And like I say, when I'm done, you can go back to thinking whatever you want. But I do hope you will consider these ideas at least. Here's another very strange one. The stigmata, the Christian stigmata. Here's one of your real true believers. And what I'm hammering on lately is that the role of faith in creating these gigantic dynamos of belief systems. And what those are capable of are a variety of miracles, a huge variety of miracles. So every belief system, in this case Christianity, provides this myth-producing dynamo and gives it huge amount of juice to manifest into physical forms like this, somebody manifesting the wounds of Christ, or here are the wounds of Christ supposedly. And I was thinking, when I looked at these, there's St. Joe. Oh, that's St. Francis, the original stigmata, getting his stigmata back in those days. But if you look at each of these belief systems, they seem to produce what each of them need to perpetuate themselves. So, in this terms, I mean, these guys, the stigmatics, they wouldn't materialize a flying saucer to perpetuate Christianity necessarily, right? They go, wait a minute, that doesn't exactly tie in. Although, I think there are ways that it does tie in. And I started thinking the other day, it's like, I was studying Poland and the fact that it's a very heavily Catholic country. They're starting to have crop circles now. The crop circles are all in giant crosses, which is very odd, And I showed at my lecture in Denver that fish, they found that all the crosses were materializing out in the fields. And the people go out there and they say, well, these are all crosses. Huh. And they're happening in pagan and early Christian sites, just to make it even more interesting. And then some fisherman out in the lake hundreds of miles away goes up, pulls up this sturgeon or whatever, I can't remember what kind of fish it is, great big fish with a giant Celtic cross, perfectly imprinted in its side. He had no idea that the crop circles were even happening. He said, what's this? And it was the exact specs of the crop circles that they'd found. So anyway, what I'm promoting is the idea that each of these giant belief systems comes up with their form of miracle, of manifestation and materialization that perpetuates them, makes them a giant dynamo which keeps large groups of people coherent. You know, it's a survival biological mechanism. If everybody had their totally own belief system, we wouldn't have a civilization today, right? Because everybody would have their exact own thing. We never hook up on anything. We never agree on anything. We never have large groups of people building stuff together. Oddly enough, if you look at the mutilations in the crop circles, they only happen in Christian countries. Now, why is that? If it's true, if it's an alien phenomenon, I mean, there's very few exceptions. Now, in India, where the cow is sacred, there are no mutilations. In a country like Russia, where I don't know exactly what their religion is, I can't exactly figure out what's going on there. There are no mutilations. There are none in China. It's virtually all Christian. It's all Christian, 99%. Somehow it links up with the mutilations in the crop circles in particular. Now, UFOs are the one thing that seem to be truly ubiquitous. And I'm starting to get out of time here, but I did want to present this idea that, well, that was back to a cattle mutilation. I'm saying, are these the stigmata of a UFO religion? So in other words, we need some dramatic, physical, material symbol that will keep renewing that belief system, that to keep it lively and transformative and dynamic, that somehow we need miracles. Any belief system does. So is this possibly the UFO equivalent of a Christian stigmata in somebody's hand? I mean, it looks kind of similar, and it's kind of similar in many ways if you think about it. The blood's missing in the cattle mutilations. And for that matter, are implants another type of stigmata also? Something that seems kind of high-tech and kind of alien-related and seems to build more belief in the UFO belief system. And I'm not saying the UFO belief system is necessarily bad. It actually, I think, has a terrific role in our evolution, no matter what it is. If it's truly extraterrestrials, then all bets are off. You know, we're off in a whole other direction as a species. If it's not extraterrestrials, if it's somehow us or the planet Gaia consciousness tricking us into believing it's extraterrestrials, what it's doing in effect is creating a tremendous openness on our part to space exploration, to possibly going out in the universe and dealing with aliens somewhere out there, to prepare ourselves culturally and every other way to get off the planet. Here again, we're back to biological Darwinism, that somehow we've got to get off this planet if we're going to survive as a species. I'm not sure I'm going to make it to the slide where it shows all the Earth-crossing civilization-ending asteroids, right? I saw this in a science journal. Oh boy, that's a good one. Here's little Earth sitting there in the middle of this, and then zooming around it are 2,000 objects just missing Earth-crossing orbits. Every one of them civilization-ending. It's over, bye, gone. If one of those hits us. So those scientists that study that stuff say, it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. So even if they kept missing us for the next 4 billion years, then the sun blows up and we're toast anyway. And 4 billion years isn't a tremendously long time. People act like billions of years. Well, I keep going back to this thing about the age of the universe. Right now they've got the age of the universe at somewhere around 13 billion years. And this geologist found a rock in my backyard. They were up there looking for something or other, sun, oil. And he said, this rock is over 4 billion years old. It's sitting in my backyard. I went, that rock's 1/3 the age of the entire universe. It's sitting in my backyard. I mean, 13 billion, you know, Bill Gates has more dollars than that. I could count to that high. 13 billion isn't like the ultimate number in the world to me. Now that's pretty fresh. So my point is it really possible that we are alone in the universe? Back to Arthur C. Clarke's original premise. is it possible that it's all originating here, that somehow the universe is trying to become self-reflective through us, through our consciousness? Maybe, I mean, it's, if you look at it from one direction and all the scientific material and everything that has gone on, there is still not one shred of evidence for extraterrestrial life that is accepted by the scientific community or by the public at large. Now I know that may be hard to take to say that to a UFO crowd, but think about it. Where is it, you know? On a Martian rock? They can't agree. It's like, oh, that's a fossil. Oh, that's a natural chemical. So there's not one single thing in my mind that is not somehow at least equivocal that there is life anywhere. We've been searching the heavens, SETI and all this business. We're looking for every sign of life anywhere. We have not seen one single response. We don't have one alien body that you and I can go look at. We don't have one piece of technology. We don't have one fossil. I mean, that's the hard line, right? Yeah, right. That is the hard line. But what we have is a tremendous amount of circumstantial evidence. But if you look at quantum physics, just because we have a relic doesn't necessarily mean that it wasn't materialized by our collective unconscious for the purpose of feeding this belief system. So, even though you have physical evidence like cattle mutilations, I just don't think you can make that giant leap. It's got to be aliens. All I'm trying to do is open another line of inquiry. And I just wish that people would take it seriously. I really get tired of every time I pick up something that people say, the only alternatives, it's all nonsense, it's aliens from outer space, or it's the government. What else could it be? I'm opening another line of inquiry in ufology. I would like to. I know it's difficult because people are set in their ways. But I think it definitely bears looking at these possibilities. And I think ultimately that might be an even bigger, greater potential good for humanity, what we learn through this process, than any contact with aliens. If it's going to be aliens and they're going to spoon feed us, we're always going to be second tier if it is aliens. But if it's only just us, and we're learning about our potential and our ability to create and change reality, that could be a much bigger finding than any contact with so-called aliens. So anyway, stay positive, think good, eat right, be nice to each other, and what was my other advice? Oh, thank you very much for your time and patience. Appreciate it. Thanks.
And are you going to hang with us tonight?
I'm going to hang a while. I got to get going in a while, but
you'll be around for a bit, so maybe some people can corner you if they like to speak.
I would like.